I think we need to Julia's going to get that on. I think Julia might start it for a moment, right? Julia?
Sure. I don't necessarily need to, but we're talking about the small business grant program, providing you an overview. And basically, we want to go through three different things. One, what we did back in March, which was the city's small business emergency grant program, and then discuss the Business Oregon grant and our proposed program criteria, and then the CARES Act funding through Washington County and the proposed grant criteria for there. So Bruce is going to kind of walk through those different things, and each one is slightly different in terms of either what we did or what we have to do, and amounts and criteria and that kind of stuff. And so that's why we want to walk through that with you.
So, Mayor and Councilors, thanks, Julia. Before I talk about the proposed new programs, I just thought spend a moment talking about setting the stage and talking about the previous program that the city initiated back in March. We distributed about 197,000 to about 93 businesses. Very simple criteria. You have to be impacted by COVID. You have to have no more than 10 employees, a Sherwood business license, a facility in the city of Sherwood, and priority for some of the businesses that were closed, such as food and drink, or restricted in some manner. The idea was just to get the money out there as quickly as we could. There were no federal programs at that time. And the idea was that these funds were from the general fund, and we would try to get all or some of it reimbursed, which is what you were working on at the last council meeting with the IGA. So the next
one of the reasons why we are talking about this is that this was, we've done it, we know we did it, I think it went well, and so we kind of are using that as a little bit of a foundation for the other programs. So that's why Bruce went over what we did previously. Okay.
So the first proposed new program is a Business Oregon grant. It would provide a one-to-one match to cities and throughout Oregon to provide grants to small businesses. So the city had asked for $200,000 very reasonably, I guess, on my part, with the prior grant that I just talked about being used as the one-on-one match. We received $35,000, like a lot of cities. They spread the peanut butter, as it was explained to me, very thinly. And due to the state program requirements, at least 50% of the businesses that receive funds under this program have to be sole proprietors. And the way we figured it is, since we have a match, we came up with a match of local funds, previous local funds to this. So really all we need from the business proprietorship side is about a little over $3,000 from the Business Oregon grant for sole proprietors. Next slide talks about the Business Oregon grant criteria. Almost everything on this page is a state requirement. The only exceptions are when it's in italics. So let me just briefly review some of the italics. So we're saying that you have to have a city business license, you have to have a physical facility in the city of Sherwood, and at the very bottom of the page, if you're part of a chain, you should be a locally owned franchise. We're not looking for the large corporations to receive funds. Some of the other aspects in here, very, very briefly, is you have to demonstrate that you've been economically affected by COVID. To be eligible, you can be a for-profit corporation or certain kinds of nonprofits, and you have to have been prohibited from being in business due to the governor's order. There's an alternative to that. You can show a decline in sales, decline in revenue, based on how it's explained in here. 25 employees or fewer, that's a state requirement, as were the other two. You cannot have been able to receive Paycheck Protection Program, PPP money, or what's known as EIDL, Economic Injury Disaster Loan money, at the time that you make application for this program. You have to be headquartered in Oregon, have principal operations in Oregon, registered with the Secretary of State if that's needed, and that's basically mostly the state requirements that are in here. Going to the next page, okay, the award amount is again a state requirement, and you can get the grant based on the number of employees you have, or if a business provides documentation on their fixed operating expenses during a 60-day period, which is defined in here. So if you have 0 to 5 employees, you could get a $2,500 grant or something higher, but the range is actually if you have 21 to 25 employees, 12,500 to 25,000 per business. So that's how the state program reads. The award process is, obviously we're going to get many more applications for $35,000 than we would have funding for. So we're proposing to put all the eligible businesses that meet the city and the state requirements into a pool, into a lottery pool, and award based on available funds. The next slide tries to explain the three different pots of CARES Act money. Do you want me to go through that, or?
I can go through it, and maybe Joe can add on if he wants to. We got a little confused, and so we thought maybe council might be confused too, because there's lots of things coming at you from the county. So there's really three buckets that we've been talking about. One is reimbursing the cities for COVID-related expenses, and that's one that we submitted to the county already for a little over $92,000, and then we will submit monthly requests. The other one would reimburse cities for funds that we granted, so the $200,000 or almost $200,000 that we mentioned earlier would be reimbursed to us for the Small Business Emergency Relief, and you'll be seeing an IGA August 4th for that. And then the third bucket is additional funds for us to grant more money, and that's really what we're talking about this evening. But we wanted to make that distinction for you guys.
So
okay.
The next slide is the CARES Act funding program, which is money distributed through the county. It's CARES Act federal money through the county. Some mandatory criteria, not necessarily coming from the county in this particular case, but we're saying that you need to have a current business license in Sherwood. You've got to have a physical business presence, brick and mortar type of thing in the city. You're going to have to provide us with your W-9s. You're going to have to demonstrate that you're economically affected, adversely affected by COVID, and actually have to have documentation to that effect. 25 or fewer full-time equivalent employees. The grants from the city with this CARES Act money can be used for operating expenses for businesses that were affected by the public health crisis, and therefore expenses from March 8th through December 30th. If they're a part of a chain, it's a locally owned franchise. For profit, non-profit, only 501c3s though are eligible under the CARES Act. And you're going to have to explain how you're going to use the grant monies. But again, you got to document. The business has to document the actual losses. The next slide is priorities, right? The priorities would be the business is forced to close completely by the governor's order. Another priority is businesses are restricted in operation due to the governor's order. Priorities, we believe, should also be given to pay various kinds of business expenses, not so much payroll, because other programs have dealt with that, but more business mortgage expenses, lease payments, utility costs to help a business recover. At the time of this grant award, we're saying, our proposal is that you should not have received PPP or EIDL funds. Then we're also looking for businesses that are actually in commercial store space or industrial space or commercial office space. And because of some language in the county IGA, we're saying historically disadvantaged business owners. So we're also indicating in here that businesses that did receive funding from the city's March program could apply again, but they obviously have to receive the number of points, and I'm going to talk about points in just a moment at the next slide, which is the award process, I think. The award process. So obviously we think we're going to get more applications than we have money, once again. So we have a point system that's described in the material that we sent you last week, based on the priorities that I just went over. We're proposing a review committee, and they would make funding recommendations within the point range. Awards could be smaller here than under the state program that I just mentioned. These could be from $2,500 to $5,000 based on the number of jobs, full-time jobs, the business has. And if there's if there's a lot of businesses that really meet all the criteria and they're similar point values, then we're probably going to need some kind of a lottery system for that. Anyway, that's just really intended as a brief summary. We've given you much more detail on the attachments that we sent last week's email, and that really sort of concludes staff's presentation. And we're going to be planning to coming back on August the 4th with two different intergovernmental agreements, one for the Business Oregon or state program, and the other for the CARES Act program with the money distributed by the county. And one thing I didn't say is that the CARES Act is $248,000. That's the funds that we're talking about. I forgot to mention that earlier. So glad to answer any questions now or later.
I have a question. This is Counselor Young. Sorry, my headphones died, so I have to yell. You mentioned that for the CARES Act, that it wouldn't be for people who might, or they wouldn't use the funds for things like payroll because they got other funding. Yet they're not allowed to apply if they received PPP funding.
No, that's not correct.
Is that not correct?
There's
You're talking about the CARES Act.
Yes.
So they can.
So,
go on. I'm sorry.
oh, I was just going to say, so it wasn't that they, it's not intended to be used for those things. We're trying to figure out how to prioritize. And so if we were going to add a priority for something, we thought it would be better to add a priority for people that are using it for things that they likely wouldn't have gotten some other funding for. And part of the payroll aspect is also people have gotten stimulus checks and things like that. And so that was just sort of, as we were talking through what we thought would be a good way to prioritize, that's kind of where we landed.
It's just a proposal. This is staff's proposal.
Yeah, I have questions about the.
We're not,
Yeah.
we're not doing questions. We're just going to wrap it up and go to a council meeting in a second. Anything else you want to review before we break for the council meeting? Since we're 3 minutes away.
Nope, we'll come back to questions. Thanks, Bruce. I didn't think you'd get through it, and I was wrong. So
He's going to have to go get oxygen for having to go through that so fast to not be able to breathe the entire time he spoke.
I think I'm not wearing my mask. Oh, yes, I am.
all right.
Thank you, Bruce. The work session is going to be we're going to temporarily adjourn the work session. We'll come back after the city council meeting. Thanks, everybody.